Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's event, Stronger Together, How Do We Engage Male Allies to End Gender-Based Violence? My name is Bonnie Douglas, pronouns are she, her, and I am Executive Director and Senior Project Manager at CCWESTT. And on behalf of CCWESTT, it's a pleasure to welcome you all here to learn more about engaging men as allies. Before we begin, a bit of upfront housekeeping. This event is being offered with French translation, which looks like a globe at the bottom of your screen, most typically. And if you're looking for that French interpretation, click on that globe and it will give you the options. Questions for today's session can be added into the Q&A section, and there will be time at the end to address and have discussions around your questions. Now, to begin further, I'd like to acknowledge that our greater science, engineering, trades, and technology community is situated on the ceded and unceded traditional territories of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples from coast to coast to coast. CCWESTT respects and affirms the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples and the relationships to these lands, and will continue to honor the commitments to self-determination and sovereignty made to Indigenous nations and peoples. CCWESTT acknowledges the historical and present-day oppressions, including violence and genocide of the original peoples, their lands, and cultures. All must contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey we share together to grow our society. CCWESTT fervently believes that science, engineering, trades, and technology is enriched through collective relations and knowledge sharing, and is committed to helping enhance and build these relations. I myself live and work in a territory that was established by a treaty signed in 1790. And this treaty covers an area including parts of what's now the City of London, where I live and work, and the counties from Middlesex to Essex, a treaty line that follows the south of the river that connects these lands and nourishes them. The Anishinaabe people refer to the Thames River, what's now known as the Thames River, as the Deshkan Zibi, which means antler river in Ojibwe. The river has also been called in the past Akunisepi, antlered river, by the Neutrals, later La Tranchée by the early French explorers, and even later La Tranche before it adopted its current name that is commonly known as the Thames River. I encourage each of us to become knowledgeable of the lands we are situated on and to assist in long-term collective relationships. It's up to all of us to understand how the land has and continues to nourish, heal, protect, and embrace us, and that we are all each land stewards for the present and the future. All right, let's get things started in our discussion for today. So we're so excited to be gathering together in this virtual space with some amazing humans on the first day of the 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence. CCWESTT is a national coalition that advocates for gender equity in science, engineering, trades, and technology, is working actively to mobilize systems change in this space. And to set the stage for the discussion, we do realize that some of you may be joining us on your lunch hour or break, so feel free to grab your food, beverage of choice, sit back for what I'm sure will be an insightful conversation with all the folks here today. And before the presentation begins, I'd like to invite everyone to submit any questions they have for our panelists by putting that into the Q&A, and then the host will be able to pull on the questions. As for moderating today's discussion, I will be one of the co-moderators. And by way of introduction, I studied engineering. I actively play I play the trumpet in my community and worked for almost 20 years in food manufacturing. So all those three things combined, I'm no stranger to male-dominated spaces, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today. And I'm pleased to be co-moderator with Jove Nazatol, project coordinator at CCWESTT, and I'll pass it over to them to introduce themselves and our amazing panel.
Thank you, Bonnie. As Bonnie mentioned, I am project coordinator here at CCWESTT. I am also a cabinet maker by trade, and outside of work, I am a performance artist and a roller derby player. So roller derby, not unfortunately, but roller derby is not a quite male dominated. It's mostly women. I do play mostly with women, so that is kind of nice. Although as a trans non-binary person myself, maybe not fully my community. Um, I'm very excited today to be joined by three panelists for this insightful discussion on engaging men as allies to end gender-based violence. I'll introduce each one before we get started. So, as a reminder, please you can message the host for any questions you have along the way, so we can give our speakers time to answer these during the Q&A. So, we'll be having a panel discussion for the first hour. If we have some time, we will cover some of the Q&A questions. But then we will be doing some closing statements so that we can finish the recording. And then we'll have a more informal kind of chat Q&A session for half an hour after the panel discussion. So firstly, let me introduce Trevor Mayo. Trevor is a diversity, inclusion, and violence prevention consultant who focuses on transformative projects around the world. Trevor works with government and corporate partners on deconstructing gender norms and creating innovative violence prevention programming. He possesses unique expertise from working with professional sports, hospitality, technology, extractive, and post secondary organizations internally and externally to help foster more inclusive, safe, and successful environments. Trevor is a regular commentator on News Talk 1010 programs and has been featured in numerous print, radio, and television media throughout North America. Next up, we have Jeff Pereira. Since 2008, Jeff has been speaking to audiences across North America slash Turtle Island about embracing helpful versus harmful ideas of manhood, men striving to be allies towards gender equity, as well as helping end gender-based violence and building bridges across differences. Jeff started Higher and Learning as an online space to share his written pieces, videos, and TEDx talks, exploring how men can be a part of change by being models of possibility for others. Last but not least, Travis Woodworth. Travis is the founder and director of practice at Tatigli, an Indigenous-owned safety services firm based in Nova Scotia. His background spans the trades, electrical work, manufacturing, and the military, and those experiences shape the way he approaches safety today. He's known for bringing an Indigenous perspective into psychological health and safety, focusing on relationships, trust, and the real barriers that keep people from speaking up at work.
Okay, so I think it's up to me to get this conversation started. So by way of just putting things into perspective, a crucial part of the systemic change, when we're talking about systemic change within our ecosystem that's needed, is what I describe as the much needed shift in learning and workspaces to be safer and more inclusive to everyone. So it's regardless of their gender, race, sexuality, disability, and other intersections. And make no mistake that gender-based violence is a systemic issue in workplaces, particularly those that are male dominated, and that act of harm is occurring that affects everyone's dignity. And in this, it's important to include all genders, women, men, gender diverse, in this conversation and in the change work. So that's where I'm kind of coming to in this space and looking forward to this conversation. Jove, did you have any contextual thoughts also before we go into the questions?
Yeah, so as a former tradesperson myself, I'm too familiar with how male-dominated that industry is, right? So I support and thoroughly believe that programs and initiatives that give women and gender diverse people tools to navigate the challenges that come with that is really important and is really helpful. But at the end of the day, women and gender diverse folks only make up about 5% of the skilled trades. So, and I just facilitated the We Are Trades workshop over the last couple of weeks, and I've told my cohort this last time, I will die on this hill. But I firmly believe that we need to be engaging with the 95% of folks in the industry, so namely men, so that we can create real and lasting change in the industry and not expect the 5% to change and shift in order to accommodate the world around them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, why don't we hear from our wonderful panelists now? The first question, Jove and I wanted to explore with you all today. Feel free to go in whatever order you like. Um, what first made you aware of the role that men can play in preventing gender-based violence, and why are you doing the work? I think Jeff feels like he wants to go first. You want to go first?
Yeah, alphabetical order. I feel like so thank you everyone joining us across the land. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all here today. So let's start with the second part of the question. I got into the work initially. It started, from my childhood. I grew up in a home of domestic violence. So witnessing, my father's violence towards my mom kind of got me tuned into at an early age the reality of women and girls, and as I got older understanding gender expansive folks and what they're collectively going through when we think of misogyny, homophobia, transphobia. But the other side of that is also it got me thinking, like, why is my dad like this? And as I grew up in a so-called priority neighborhood in Toronto, newcomers from around the world, settlers like my family here on traditional lands. But what we all had in common was struggling with ideas of manhood. And the questions I, as a child, into my teen years and adult years, was why are we like this as guys, and what could be different? What could be better? And so I remember, so a pop culture reference. I remember in the early '90s, being a kid sitting on the living room floor watching Much Music back when Much Music played music. I don't know if they're even around anymore, but the new Beastie Boys video came out, and it was a song called Sure Shot. And in the middle of this hip hop song, Adam Yao, MCA, breaks it down and he gives a shout out to women and girls. And it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, he's doing this in the middle of a hip hop song. Like, does he realize what he's doing? And it's like, well, if he can find his voice, I can find mine. And I don't think that big, our life is not, there are big moments for sure, but it's a lot of incremental things that kind of brick by brick build your understanding and help shift and change. And that was one of them, right? And the Beastie Boys went on to be very strong advocates whenever they gave award speeches talking about sexual assault, for example, at Woodstock the year they were there. So for me, it kind of got me thinking about and realizing the role that we can play, not to be heroes and saviors, but how we can help, how we can be of service and be a part of change. So that's kind of some of what kind of got me into the journey of doing this work personally and then professionally.
Amazing. You never know when the inspiration's going to strike. Um, Travis, did you want to share your thoughts?
Sure thing. So, with my background, I come from a family of a lot of hard workers, as they like to define themselves. So, we've really kind of focused our pride into our trades. And that's everything from being miners to milkmen to janitors. And then eventually, as we kind of gone up that ladder, we found that that pride had some negativity to it, that we are very insular to our group where we came from. So I'm half indigenous, and I always lived my life kind of just with Travis and my family unit growing in there. And I thought I had a pretty set way of going through life until I got older and I kind of integrated into larger groups. And I realized what was for me wasn't the same for everyone else. Even in parts of my own identity that I had less of an understanding of what they were going through. So those were my formative teenage into young 20s years, and that there was a cathartic break there. And moving on into the workforce in a grander way, I realized safety was a massive part of work and something where if people did not have a voice, it suffered. And psychological safety, which is new to most workplaces now, included the idea that people should be comfortable at their work to engage. And so that cathartic break made me realize what I took for granted was not a reality for everyone else, and that no one else was speaking up for it. So it incised me to become a cranky old bugger about it and start speaking up for others. So I run occupational health and safety. I'm a white hat there that everyone hates to see because you always think there's trouble behind it. But the reality is, we're looking at how systems play out, how people engage with the workplace, and how they go home. It's no longer that physical piece, which still a ton of work needs to be done there, but the psychological piece, which we're still just learning. And that includes looking at things from racial lenses, gender based lenses, and cultural lenses. And so part of my work today is building spaces for groups to integrate into that workplace together. So that's where I started. I have a lot of other stories son of a single mom. I got to watch her go through a very hard workplace situation, working with ex-military for most of her life. She taught me a lot about gender involvement at the workplace in a very real, sombering way, and it was part of that cathartic break, which I'm happy to discuss. But that's my start to all this.
Wonderful. Thanks, Travis. So
Thank
I
you so much,
appreciate you
Travis.
looking beyond the safety checklist. That's what I see you
Oh,
doing, right?
absolutely.
So
Even
important.
with physicals, even with physical safety, that checklist causes a lot of issues.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. I love that way of thinking. And last but not least, Trevor.
Um, you know, I it's really interesting because I'm going to go on a little bit of arc here, and it even shows that like I do this work for a living, and yet I still have some of the really strict sort of gender coding and sort of things attached to it. So I um, grew up with an older sister, like idolized my sister, was really, really close to her and sort of always wanted to be in that space. Um but I also didn't realize I was also in the closet in high school too. And so my relationship was quite complicated with gender, with masculinity, with expectations, with just different coding. And that was quite challenging. And it really sort of did challenge my relationship with masculinity, my relationship with other genders, and what that all looks like. And so what the and one of the things I started a not-for-profit quite some time ago and used fitness as mentorship tool with at-risk youth in Toronto. I didn't go to the fitness thing. I just helped on the admin side, but like that's what the point of it was. And one of the things I really noticed in that conversation when we were doing that fitness as a mentorship tool was like a lot of these guys were really struggling with their masculinity, and how that translated to the relationships with each other, relationships with partners, with family, and even in workplaces. And you really start to saw that like dismantling some of the things that they were really struggling with was they were beneficiaries of it too. And it wasn't just them coming to the conversation of like these benevolent saviors to gender-based violence or sexism in their own circles, but really recognizing that they were really directly impacted by the challenges, those norms. And one of the things that like I still work through right now, and this is one of the reasons I lean into this work, and I'm really, really very fortunate that I get to explore it, is that even having the conversation around deconstructing gender norms, masculinity, what the role is of men in all this space, is like we're all still playing with that coding, and we're all still playing with those the imprints from media, from family, from friends, from different social places. And I really struggled with that for a long time in terms of my masculinity, of looking at it in terms of being okay, I am a gay man, and there is always this thought internally or other people that my only association in caring about women is because I have a sort of a deprioritized in masculinity versus of the standard. And that's also like why I sometimes don't even mention that in workplaces and conversations too, because people naturally think like, oh, you only really care about it because you are gay or you are in that space. And so I still struggle with that, which is why I lean into this work, because I recognize that these are not regular conversations that we have, that we're battling against larger programming, we're battling against our own traumas and histories. And it's really about creating space for people to be able to navigate them. And I know that if it's in the workplace, if it's in the social, we don't have those skills learned and practiced. And so I come to this space just trying to create more of those. And I know it's clunky and it's messy and it's weird and it's awkward, but like the more that we can do, the more that we can start to break through some of those norms that are still, even us in the space, are holding us back.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks for reminding us about the gender coding, but also I'm noticing with the three of you on the panel today, you've all mentioned an influential and important women that's been in your life. So I think that's really interesting. The next topic we wanted to discuss, I think, Jove, you have that question.
Yep. So I'm gonna ask the three of you, what practical steps can men take to move from awareness to action in their personal and professional lives? So I heard from all three of you, influential people in your lives who kind of like click that light switch kind of thing and like switch that thinking. But I think the thinking is one step. The practicality, the how do we show up every single day? How do we do the work? What are the practical steps we can take? That I think is a very kind of like important conversation that I think is missing sometimes from the conversations that we have. So we'll switch up the order. I'm gonna ask Travis to go first.
If you'll unmute. Absolutely. That's a really important question because coming to that point where you realize things aren't right, you have to then kind of think, well, what can I do about it? And that's a really big question. I do a lot of first aid training. I get people ready to deal with some really negative situations. And the biggest fear there for that physical harm was bystander
Mm.
effect. People are afraid engaging, afraid that they don't know enough, afraid they don't know what to do, afraid that what they will do will make the situation worse or make them look dumb or uninformed or ill-informed or misinformed. There's that fear of engaging. And kind of that's where I spent my middle 20s kind of dealing with that, figuring out how to speak up, even in rough situations, and particularly in rough situations. That's a practical step. Learning to speak up, learning how to engage a workplace, a situation, a culture in a way that you can support others. And I would say comfortably, and that's not a real statement there. It's always an uncomfortable conversation, but being able to engage with those uncomfortable situations and to support others going through it. That's the advocacy piece. And checking in with people who you perceive to be strong advocates within there as well. In this way, what we're doing is starting to raise our own voices and allowing others to raise their voices as well and develop a culture of safety. Again, you're going to hear me beat on that. That's my whole job, safety. But that's the culture of safety, the abilities to speak up and engage from physical safety all the way to cultural, gendered, and racialized safety elements. People are terrified to speak up, and not simply because it's the content itself is terrifying, but because it's hard to speak up, period. And so that's where the practical step is learning to find your own voice and then leveraging it for others so they can find their own. So I build safety systems that build that into it. But there's a dozen ways to attend to that problem. And that's
Mhm.
where that's our practical steps. Find our way to engage, support, and move this initiative along. Speak up.
Yep. Thank you so much, Travis. And I think, you mentioned the thing about having uncomfortable conversations. And I think, us as a society, we need to be a bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable. In general, I think this discomfort is how we learn, and discomfort is our body telling us something is wrong and something is needs to be addressed. And I think we need to be okay with that. We need to be okay with saying, okay, this is uncomfortable, but it has to be done. Because if we're comfortable, we're not growing. Trevor?
Yeah, I would actually like take it and run with what Travis said in terms of, you know what I mean, talking about it. That is one of the most challenging things, but it's one of the things that's the most instantly transformative on workplaces, friend groups, families, in any different space. It feels clunky, it feels weird, it can be really vulnerable. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to create that space. But then once you create it, other people start leaning in to that space themselves as well. And so it becomes a little less scary, a little less clunky. And so I think that's the first one. And I think when you think of a lot of workplaces, where I spend a lot of time in male dominant workspaces, there is always these like unwritten rules. It's the culture of the organization. So like that's really where we need to like navigate and challenge, and we all have individual roles. So if we're looking for like talking about it, great, cool. That is how we start to challenge some of those unwritten rules. So like if you think about it, policy is not culture, people are culture. It's the way that we talk, that we communicate, we trust, the way we engage with each other is your workplace culture. And so part of that culture is accountability, vulnerability, how we hold the space, how we challenge each other, the friction that's created, but then also the healing and the growth that happens in that space as well. And so that's where people have a tremendous amount of opportunity to show up, offer some vulnerability, hold the space for someone else who leans in. I think the other thing that I would just mention on this too is that's practical, no matter if we're talking in the workplace or at home or what have you, as people start to like think about this, is like pumping the brakes on our internal dialogue. Is a lot of the time when we're starting to talk to other people, we frame it through our own experience and we frame it through our own lens about how we've lived it or our thoughts or what have you. And then we also frame it in terms of like, why have you talked to this person? Why have you called this? Or like, I think you should do this. And so we frame it through our own lens and then we try to action solutions. And one of the things that I think we need to practice a little bit more, in the space while talking about it and engaging is just pumping that internal brakes on the internal dialogue so we can actually start to hear people's lived experiences and stories a little bit more authentically. And then you can figure out how to process that and integrate that into your thinking and your methodology or what you want to do. But that's the thing. Again, I think about practical. My last one, really quickly, on the practical thing is start showing up to ERGs in your workplace. Men don't see themselves as gendered, and so they don't show up to women's ERGs or the gender working group or what have you in workplaces. And that's really where they're needed. And it's not to go there and take the podium and or to rush in as like a white knight in any way, but really what it is to show up and start to listen to other people's experiences and be ready to be called in for where you're actually needed, whether it be your voice, whether it be your time, your energy, whatever that actually looks like. But starting to show up is like the smallest burden and the smallest lift for a lot of us to do, but has a tremendous impact because then we actually start to get called in on what's actually needed into the next steps.
Mm-hmm. And I think a big one too is like allyship is a verb, right? And so without the work, you can't really call yourself an ally. And I think that really is that allyship is showing up and going and doing things rather than just like kind of sitting back. I think with regards to pumping the brakes on your own dialogue, I heard a term on a podcast called I think cinema therapy called shelving your agenda, which I really like. So if you're in a relationship, you get into an argument, sometimes one person has to shelve their agenda in order to address what is the issue at hand first. So it's not about saying I don't have issues, but it's about saying, okay, right now my issue is not the most pertinent one. Let's address the issue at hand first. Once we address that issue, I can take my agenda off of the shelf and then we can address that. And I think I really like that term as well. Jeff?
Yeah, this is great. So I think it's important to kind of recognize what are some of the roadblocks, what are things getting in the way of you making that connection, connecting the dots. You know, I don't know who your favorite person is for quotes, but I love anonymous. Whoever they are, they always have the best quotes. And one I love is the quote, "Compassion without action is just observation." You know, so it's what is the bridge from awareness to action? And for me, that bridge is empathy. So it might not be a practical step, but I think it's a key to kind of think about how developing our empathy, I describe it like as a muscle, developing our empathy muscle will help us kind of take action, right? So for me, this little three-step formula I use internally is I say, I see you, I feel you, I got you. So I see you is the awareness piece, right? It's like I see what you're going through. I see the statistics, or I see this few of you in my workplace in this field, right? I feel you is the empathy piece. I imagine what that feels like, how that, means that you're less likely to be in the field, and if you are, you're likely to be alone in it, or not feeling supported, not feeling that you can be your best, and you're probably going to exit or leave, or just not contribute in the way, or feel safe, feel included. I got you as the action piece. So what am I going to do about it, right? So for me, it's taking that moment to kind of understand and develop that. And that muscle is something we can build together, right? That we can spot each other in building muscles like empathy, or nurturing it, redeveloping it if it's gone atrophied for you, or to make it stronger, right? So it's kind of like looking out for one another, means kind of as the men in a space having these conversations, as Trevor pointed out, like talking about that and building that muscle, spotting one another in our growth, and learning from women and gender expansive people, the ones we work with, but also folks who've been in the field, and the stories we're hearing. The horrific story coming out of the States. Um, I'm blanking on her name now. I apologize. Is it
It's
is it
Amber
Amber?
Chick.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Amber Chick. Yeah, yeah. I mean, people will think of that as an extreme example, but you think of the steps that get you there into that horrific situation. So, yeah, it's empathy, I think, is the bridge that gets us there.
for sure. And I think I think I think one of the conversations that we have a lot when we talk about engaging with men is the sense of like men not being allowed to have feelings, not being allowed to have that empathy and that care. And really, I see that a lot in the men that I used to work with in the trades, where they feel like no one cares about them. They feel like because they feel like no one cares about them, they find it very hard to be empathetic of other people. And I think we kind of need to shift that conversation a little bit in order to be like, no, um, men also deserve to talk about their feelings. Men should have spaces where they feel safe, and that they feel seen, and only through kind of that can they hopefully see other people as well. Um, so yeah, so I want to segue into our next question. I think, it's important for me to point out that while we do have a panel of men today here with us, that we have, diverse experiences in the room and diverse intersectionalities in the room that are, something that is really important for us here at CC West to center as well. So Bonnie, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah, with that thought in mind, Jove, one of the things we were curious about was, in your perspectives, how can efforts to engage men as allies be more inclusive of diverse experiences across race, sexuality, class, and culture? So I think for order, let's do Trevor first this time.
When I go into male dominant workplaces and have this conversation, one of the trickiest things to navigate is the thought and the concept of privilege. And it is incredibly triggering. It is incredibly upsetting. It is like flip the table moment in a lot of these conversations where people are like, I'm not privileged. I have X challenge and all that. And so one of the biggest things that we spend some time doing is just sort of navigating what power and privilege looks like in real terms, not academic terms, but just what it like relates. And like when you talk about guys who are really struggling around their own emotional capacity, or they have different things, and they start to see, okay, like I have a little bit less privilege maybe when it comes to my mental health. But then I have other more privilege in other areas, maybe around my identity, or maybe around my position, or what have you. And when we start to like frame it in different ways where people can start to see themselves in the conversation and less feel like an antagonist in the conversation, then they start to be able to sort of wade in a little bit more and start to break down some of those barriers in the conversation. Now, that also requires a tremendous amount of patience, because a lot of the time, like the people who are sort of doing that work and sort of really being burdened with the patients are often the people who are experiencing the harm firsthand in those conversations. And so I think for us, what I see in the space is, one is just recognizing. I mean, I don't know. I always use this. I don't use the term intersectionality when talking in a lot of workplaces, because that, again, people just sort of like hit it and be like, you're academic. But like Ted Lasso has a really great thing, like different people are different people. And they're talking about how they coach people, and they have to recognize the uniqueness of each person to be able to coach them the most effectively, come together as a team. And that really plays with people to understand lived experiences are different, that people's perspective and identities all sort of come together, and we need to see that. And the last thing I would just say is, there's always some resistance, and I can be a little bit more controversial in some of the spaces, because like, I'll push back and all that, but like you talk to some people who are really resistant about really seeing other people's identity, lived experiences, be able to see the systems of systemic challenges and oppression that exists for identities outside of their own, particularly for the dominant narrative. But then you start to put some things, and you start to like feel the relationship, what it looks like firsthand for them. So you talk to guys in the male dominant workspace and being like, okay, you don't want to see race, you don't want to see gender, you don't want to see all these different things. Then we're not going to acknowledge your age. And we're not going to look at your 25 years experience. That's out the window. We're only going to see you as Mr. P who shows up to work. And then it's like, well, no, that's really important. That's part of my life. That's the experiences. That's expertise. That's all of these different things to come together. That's challenges I've overcome. And you're like, absolutely. And then you start to see yourselves in other experiences. That's really important for people to see that part of me, not to excuse it and pretend like it's not part of my identity. And when guys start to see that, then they start to pump the brakes on internal dialogue, start to listen to other people's stories a little bit more, and actually hear where they're coming from and what that looks like. And then also a little bit of space for people to be able to bounce around and figure out what that looks, how they understand that to them. Because if it's about learning, then people need to bounce around and challenge and have that like friction in their mind to really sort of to stretch and grow a little bit. Yeah. So, anyways.
Thanks, Trevor. No, the power and privilege conversation is a challenging one. So you really shared some practical examples on how to kind of, put the brakes on the personal agenda and try to help others connect with others. Plus, you added Ted Lasso for the win. I think there's lots of ways that Ted Lasso can be applied in this work and conversation. Surprised it's taken this long to come up, actually. And then let's go to Jeff next.
Yeah, I think it's important to just recognize that, your advantage doesn't have to define you so much as what you do about it, right? Like that can be what defines you, the way you show up in everyday moments. And a lot of our workplaces, even though if it's not a competitive, like you're not on a sales team and you're trying to get the number one, like we still approach these things as not collective, but as it's like you against the world, or it's yeah, that competitive edge. So I think thinking more about how we can be better teammates to one another, and that everyone we're on the same team, that kind of mentality helps shift it. And recognizing for people on your team who have the different lived experiences, different identities, how that impacts them. Like I think about, for example, men of color. We talk about how the not feeling that we're included, or that our what we bring to the table is not recognized, not valued, or that we just have to go ahead and get ahead of the stigma, get ahead of the idea of what we're capable of, and work twice or three times as hard. Thinking about how that impacts us, the payoffs and the costs for trying to be that type of employer, to be that type employee, to be that type of person in a space. So just being mindful of that, thinking about again, my shot doesn't have to come at the expense of others, and my advantage doesn't have to define me so much as what I do about it, like in these moments. And recognizing that, yeah, it's these words, these terms we use, and I know a lot of them have been weaponized, so people are already kind of like, they hear a term or a phrase, they're like, oh, you're one of those. It's just thinking about, no, like these things are fluid. In a conversation you can have an advantage and a disadvantage, or you can be in a situation of power. And I think it's once we kind of recognize it's just the right thing to do for us as well. It makes it a better situation for all of us. Being better teammates is the way to go, and part of that is being mindful of what everybody's going through.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And Travis, do you want to add your thoughts?
Sure thing. One thing I do is I have a mantra: hurt people, hurt people. And when we're engaging with workplaces, I try to make sure people realize that being harmed or normalizing harm or toxicity in a workplace causes you yourself harm. Even if you man up and soldier on from it, it's something that leaves an indelible mark onto yourself in the way you operate into the future. And you normalize it so much, oh, that's just part of the job. Having that conversation, helping people realize, oh, hurt people, and that you've been harmed inadvertently, maybe with intention, and you passing it along is hurting other people. So having that conversation, making them resonate with yourself or as the facilitator or whoever's doing the work, to realize we've all taken actions in our life that have normalized things that have a bigger impact on others. So by doing that, we can start addressing these things that we have normalized, just kind of considered part of the workplace. The military was infamous for this, still is. And then kind of turning it on its head and kind of implying forced empathy. Now that you kind of realize that this was a harm back in the day, it kind of made you feel shitty back in the day, why are we now pushing this onto the next generation? It's kind of breaking that cycle. And this is kind of a methodology used in all kinds of different ways. But for the workplace, when it comes to gender, racialized, again, identities in that workplace and working together, that conversation's difficult. You're going to get the pushback that Trevor spoke about. You're going to get that push back against teamwork because of hyper competitive nature of people, men in particular, that Jeff spoke of, pushing back against this. But that's that discomfort that we need, and light touch, but consistent touch with this. That's what I found to be successful. Hope that answers it.
No, that's great. Thanks, Travis. Yeah, you're helping me think about the idea of intergenerational issues in the workplace, right? So that as seniority passes on, I mean, I've seen this also in like union-based shops, right? That the as folks generally get more senior, they seem to empathize less with the junior folks and what it's like to be junior and the harms, I mean, systemic harms that happen across the layers of seniority, even within the workplace. So I think that's a really interesting point. Thanks for sharing that, Travis. And I will pass things over to Joe for the next question.
Yeah, so considering the membership that we have here at CC West and also most of the folks I think in the room, um, I think this is going to be a very important question of how do we ensure that the voices of women and gender diverse people still remain centered, even as we bring men into the conversation. So how do we make sure that women and gender diverse people still feel like their struggles are being heard, even as we bring men, even as we talk to men and tell them, hey, you have struggles too, and how do we kind of like deal with that? So I don't remember what the order was, but I'm just gonna go with the first person on my screen right now, which is Travis.
Sounds good. And that's an important question. How do we? Because as you can see with this conversation, we have all kinds of different elements coming together. We all have touch points and parallels when it comes to gender diversity at the workplace. So how do we center it back onto that? I had the same thing with Indigenous consideration. So we go to mainstream workplaces, we're trying to build a space for ourselves, and we kind of get lost in the wash. Um, the idea here is that, again, staunch advocacy and staying to the topic. Um, how do we ensure workplaces bring that to a systematic process? Is making sure people sit at the table of the deliberation and decision making. We spoke about policy and how policy doesn't make workplace culture. You're right, but it sets the tone. And so if the policy we are adopting is not informed by people who have actually encountered and lived this experience, it's not going to have uh, it's going to have a limited impact, making sure that is still a main part of that initiative. So it's high level, but ensuring that you have the right people sitting at the seats to ensure that all voices are heard. That's where I struggle with in my particular business and my own life experience, and that's where I have really worked hard to ensure that we do have butts and seats that brings that experience and that knowledge to anything we're developing at a high level. And then, there's all kinds of steps when we disseminate down, trickle down. But if it's not foundationally set up to be informed by people who are affected, disproportionately so, you're starting off at a bad spot. So that's kind of, I can speak on this for a long time, but I'm going to pass it on to someone else.
Yes, thank you, Travis. And like, yes, I agree. The people who are most affected by it need to be part of that policy change. I think too many times I've been in work environments or I've seen, you know, policy be passed where I've questioned like have they actually talked to anyone about this, like did they and actually talk to anyone who like works in the industry or who's affected by say transphobia or homophobia about this, because it doesn't feel like it because you're not listening to what I actually need. And I think that is a big part of it. It's like yes, um we do want to keep women and gender diverse experiences centered. We've been talking about it. It's really on the folks who in the powers that be to listen to and to continue listening to that. I do want to caution a little bit about the just having. I agree that folks with different experiences need to be part of the table, but just want to caution about not tokenizing those experiences and making sure that those people are welcome and valued, but also compensated fairly for their time and effort. So next on my screen is Jeff.
Yeah, I think one of the things I talk about is humility. I think humility is a big piece of this, and it's you want to be, ideally someone who's going to model change or model doing something differently is someone who's a bit, like bombastic or kind of just makes it clear and but also there's a courage that you need to kind of speak up and share things. And I think that comes from again, this idea of not centering yourself, but centering what's important to say here. It's not about what will happen to me if I say something. It's about what will happen if I don't do something, if I don't say something here. So, in some spaces that are male dominated to the point where there are no women or gender expansive people on the team, you can't tell everyone to just freeze in the lunchroom. I'm going to go find somebody, find the nearest, non-binary person and bring them into this room and they're going to let you know what's going on. Like sometimes you have to show up in that moment. And part of that is that humility of like, I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm not speaking on behalf of a group of people. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I've seen. Here's what, my understanding is. And, yeah, to take those moments to kind of, um, champion or speak to an issue, I think are so important. And to kind of embrace that, again, not with this kind of like, oh, I know more than you all. It's like just saying, it's in this place. Um, Even though these voices aren't physically present in the space, we can still hear what they're saying and value and respect their voices, their bodies, their lives. Um, in ways like that, in moments like that, and finding the uh, the nice mixture of humility and courage to kind of speak up and talk about these things.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I have a little bit of an idealistic take on this. Of I think women and gender diverse people should be in every space. We shouldn't have a space where those people are not in the rooms to speak up for themselves. But this is me kind of like this is my ideal world, right? I recognize that is not realistic at the moment in the system that we live in. Um, but yes, I mean, most of us, I hope most of us know women and gender diverse people outside of the workplace whose experiences and feelings about things we know and we care about, and so we can bring those experiences and that understanding into those male dominated workspaces to kind of push back on some of the other rhetoric maybe that we're hearing in those spaces. Travis, sorry, Trevor.
It's sort of funny because I actually grew up being called Travis and Tyler all
Oh
the time. So I
no.
actually respond to them all. So I don't know about you, Travis, but like I respond anything that
Yeah,
starts
no, I've been
I
called
respond to.
Trevor my entire life. Yeah.
Yeah, so it all works. Um, okay, so I have a few different bouncing thoughts here really quickly because I understand the danger and the frustration of now that we're switching the conversation to engaging men as stakeholders in the work. And so the conversation really shifts about what their role is, what's in it for me, how they're beneficiaries and challenging the system and leading in as allies and upstanders and all that type of stuff. Um, but I also recognize that like that also does complicate the space in terms of all the voices that are able to get speaking time. It also does sort of paint the frustration again about that sometimes these things are now only being taken seriously because men are seen as stakeholders, not as sort of just allies or people to lean in. And so I really do appreciate those challenges. I think for me, there's a few things in the workplaces is recognizing some of the different pathways that exist in terms of of being an ally, you know what I mean, like signal boosting and leaning in, giving up your space for other people as well, recognizing your role as allies in terms of chatting about people as just said when not in the room. I think one of the challenges, the barriers for a lot of guys or people in the dominant narrative, particularly, are that they don't know what they don't know and they don't know what they don't see every day. And it's not from a point of malice, it's just from a point of there's that element of privilege that's just not an experience that they've had to navigate or recognize. And so I think helping people just start to hear the stories a little bit more allows them the grace to start creating a little bit more spaces to hear stories and the want and the curiosity to hear more stories as well. You know what I mean? It's really easy for someone to say like, hey, what do you like? It's International Women's Day. What do you think about women? And like everyone's rushing to grab a microphone. But instead of like saying like, maybe I'm not the right person to sit here. Like, have you contacted so and so? Or maybe I'm not the right person in this space. And that takes a bit of courage, and that takes a bit of an ego pump, right? To be able to do that. But the more we start hearing other people's stories and experiences, the more comfortable that feels, and the less courageous that feels, because it's just, you know what I mean, that's just the pathways that have been forged there. So I recognize the complexity of and the friction that can sometimes exist in terms of engaging men in that space. But I think the other area is that like I also do take an entry point in terms of the conversation too. And like, we're not at utopia yet. And so I do very much take the entry point and say, like, how do we actually utilize the people who are now starting to lean in and want to do right and have the power and the influence to start to create some systems and culture change? And how do we inform them in our pursuit of the utopia?
Thank you so much for that, Trevor. And so I think I'm gonna pass it off to Bonnie now to do the last question.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the time and we're going to get ready to wrap things up formally for this discussion. But we can take, there's two great questions in the chat, which we can do as a Q&A after the formal kind of part is done. So hopefully folks can stay behind a couple minutes and we'll explore those a little bit more informally. So the last question we had in mind, and I'm just looking at the clock to make sure we don't go too far over time. So I'm going to call this the lightning question. So I want you to do for the lightning question is in 5 sentences or less. Can you answer this question for us? This is a good challenge. You'll stretch your muscles to be succinct. So the question is, and to give you a couple more seconds of prep because it's not quite improv, but I'm going to start with Jeff, just so that you know, Jeff. We're wondering in 5 sentences or less, how can women organizations and communities support men in doing this work effectively and responsibly?
Ooh, okay. Okay. Already using up one of my sentences. I think it's, the perception is that you're looking past me. You want me to be concerned about all these other people, all these other groups, but me. So it's helping them recognize we are invested in you. This is about us, and it's to your collective benefit as well as it is for everyone. Um, it's not at your expense, this conversation. Okay, yeah.
Great, good job. Okay, I'm keeping score, by the way. I'll let you know who did it in the best sentences possible. Travis, let's hear from you next.
Have an education-based approach. We don't know what we don't know. And that needs to be fixed.
Woo, those are short sentences. I love that. That can go on sound bites. Okay, and Trevor.
That is not going to be the vibe here. I think recognizing the genesis of a lot of the pushback, that fear, that insecurity, that the pain, all of that, recognizing those are very real feelings that need to be engaged. And then coupling that with the permission to be imperfect and learn publicly in that space. That grace around what that looks like for people is really important.
Fantastic. So it's hard for me to count which ones were like carefully crafted sentences with semicolons in them. But I'm gonna say you tied. You all did it like I didn't count your first sentence, Jeff. I didn't count the first one, which was your prep sentence. So 3 sentences. In the case of Travis, you did it with very short, succinct sentences. So great job, everyone, on the lightning question. Thanks to all three of you for being part of this really rich, really important discussion. So we have opened it up to questions in the Q&A. Like I said, there's 2 great questions in there, which we'll get to in a minute. So let me just kind of formally close things down. And then we'll stay on for a little bit longer to explore some topics further and answer those questions in the Q&A. And I'm going to turn it over to Jove to close us out.
Thank you, Bonnie. So, special thank you to Trevor, Jeff, and Travis for generously sharing your experiences with us and answering our questions, and then some more questions afterwards. Inspiring the next generation and making a better space for them is an ongoing contribution to equity in STEM and skilled trades, and we acknowledge and thank you for doing this hard work. It takes all of us to make this vibrant and supportive community a welcoming place where women and gender diverse people in SET can be seen, heard, and thrive. So, following this afternoon, we will share a recording with everyone who registered. Please feel free to pass it along to your networks and colleagues, giving them a sense of what it means to be part of Canada's leading network for advancing the roles of women and gender diverse people in SET. If you enjoyed this event, please make sure you're subscribed to our mailing list or following on social media so you don't miss our next events. In January, we'll be hosting an event to dig deeper into our recently launched Gender Equality Report Card. Also, in the new year, we'll be convening with our partners in our Engaging Men as Allies work to share best practices, findings, and to continue this crucial conversation. Don't miss our biennial conference in Calgary in May. So we'd love to hear about your best practices. Abstract submissions are due November 30th. And lastly, we could use your support to continue CCWESTT's systemic change work. There are many ways to get involved. So please check out our membership, partnership, and donation opportunities at our website at ccwest.org and be part of this movement for change. Thank you and all the best.